In this lesson, we're going to be talking about doing thumbnail sketching. So you'll see here what I have is a little template of some storyboard frames, 6 frames, and there's some lines on here also for adding notes. And this is what you might be using when you're meeting with a director, either in person or even online via Zoom or some other application, so that you can do little quick sketches live while you're speaking to the director to make sure that you're on the same page in terms of the shots that are needed. So I'm going to show you how we might start doing something like that with a few of the frames from the Gronk and Frank script. So we're doing these little thumbnails, and of course thumbnails are referred to the actual nail of the thumb, meaning a small little sketch, not too detailed, and that's where that comes from. And I'm sketching in here just really loose, showing the lightning, showing the volcanoes, distance, and showing a little bit of this environment. So again, it's super quick, very rough. This is just to convey the idea and to make sure that the composition and the elements are all placed properly within the frame. And little notes here, just for my own sake: prehistoric landscape. Number your frames too. That also helps in keeping things organized and working things out. So we're going to go to frame 2 here. We're going to show we're a little bit closer here. I'm going to show the sort of first time we see our characters, Gronk and Frank, coming into the scene. I'm erasing a little bit of the background so that I can just start doing little silhouettes of Gronk and Frank. That's all we need. We don't need any detail. Just showing their little silhouettes and with their spears, little arrow showing which direction they're walking, and also a little bit of a shadow. And that's all we need for that. And the little note we see our heroes. And we'll move on to frame 3. So maybe the director wants to convey that this is going to be a classic 2-shot where we see the 2 of the characters, a little bit more in cowboy frame, which is essentially about the thigh up, which is a classic sort of shot. And that comes from film and TV, the classic cowboy shot, meaning the cowboy standing sort of from the thigh up, about to draw his gun and shoot another character that's off screen. So it's a classic sort of referred to shot in storyboarding and in film. And again, really rough, very loose, just a nod of the environment, because we're still in the prehistoric area here with the volcano. That's all we need for that. On to frame 4. There we go. Oh, 2-shot. Notes are important. On to frame 4. Into this frame, again, really simple, very basic. We're going to show the cow type prehistoric creatures that Gronk and Frank come upon. They're about to hunt because they're hungry for a steak. And back then you had to do a lot of work to get a steak. And they see these cow creatures here grazing. Again, really simple. Just going to show the basic silhouettes for placement. Don't need a lot of detail. That'll come later. Go back into doing a more finished shooting board frame. And a little note here: cow creatures. Up to frame 5. Gronk and Frank are about to strike. They have their spears ready. They're very hungry. So they're getting ready. And again, we're just very loosely. And it's okay to pop out of the frame at this point, because then you're going to contain that later when you do the more finished frames. So it's okay to pop out of the frame a little bit, as long as you're getting all the information there and the director is happy with the composition and the placement and maybe even the attitude of the characters. Very loose, very rough. And you'll notice one of the distinct aspects of the difference between Gronk and Frank is that one of them has their sort of animal skin on their shoulder, and that helps separate them in this very simple storyboards. Yeah, they're about to hunt. Frame 6, they're about to get attacked themselves by this huge saber-toothed tiger. The saber-toothed tiger is going to be coming leaping out of the grass very dramatically, very strongly. We're not going to do too much detail, just more about the rough placement of that saber-toothed tiger. I'm just showing the arrow that's going to be leaping forward. It's in a similar environment that they are, some high grass. And finally, a little note: cat attack. Okay, so that's how to do a thumbnail.
In this lesson, I'm going to do a quick drawing demonstration to outline and show you quickly how I create a frame. So I usually start off with the main figure and I rough things in with a lighter gray. I usually don't work with black, so I create like a gray tone. And I rough in everything very, very loosely, very, very quickly. This is sped up a little bit, quite a bit, but I want to be able to just show you quickly how it is that I construct a frame. And like I said, very, very loosely, just placing everything. I'm not being precious. And so you notice I lowered the opacity, and now I come in on a separate layer and begin placing my more definitive line in black. And I'm fairly confident that I'm going to consider this to be my final drawing for this level of finish of the storyboard frame. So you can see I work fairly methodically, essentially tracing the underdrawing that I did. Now, what you'll notice in a moment here is that I don't like the way the arm is sticking out too far, his right arm. So I moved the underdrawing a little bit over to the right and everything to adjust that. And that's one of the benefits of working on layers, is to be able to fix little things like that. And of course, you could also cut and paste areas of your underdrawing to fix it as well. And now, after I feel like I'm fairly confident with it, I remove the underdrawing layer, and then I go over and tighten it up a bit more, adding in a few more darks and some details. And that's essentially it. That's how I construct the frame. In this lesson, we're going to be talking about adding tone to a frame. So here we can see we have our character in the restaurant, and I have several layers here. Everything's separated. I've got him on a separate layer, and I have the background on a separate layer. And you could also see that I have the restaurant sort of environment sort of soft and sort of subdued, blurred, so it looks like it's in the background. I'm adding a layer of tone, fairly dark, a little spot there that I missed, and I'll clean that up. And so I like starting off darker. Darker gives me more options because I can always lighten it. So you can see here on the right, I'm adjusting the opacity. I can make it lighter or I can make it darker, and it's good to be having control over that. Right now I'm adding a little bit of light effects with my soft eraser tool, and I'm adding that throughout the whole entire frame, wherever I think light might be hitting some surface areas, tops of the tables, etc. Again, I'm not being too precious about this. These are shooting boards. They don't have to be too tight, but just adds a little atmosphere and a little depth, and it's a nice little quick way to add some dimension to your frames. What I'm also going to do is add a little bit of a light effect here into the background. That's kind of nice. So clicking back onto again, it can adjust the opacity, right? Yes. I like that. Clicking back onto our character, he needs to have some tone in him. I'm going to add another layer in multiply, and I'm just going to use my ink brush. And again, I'm going a little darker than I may need to. And I like filling it in almost like a coloring book. This only takes a few seconds, actually. And I like the control of it. I could, of course, also use a lasso tool and do a fill, and I do that often as well for big areas. But for the purpose of this lesson, I'm just going to show you how you can just quickly color in a layer and add tone. And again, a little bit darker. I'm going to clean up some little edges here. At some point, I'm going to grab my little eraser tool and clean up some of these little edges here. Very easy to do. It's good to keep those edges clean. Yeah, so here we go. We've got our character here with a nice tone on him. And what I'm going to do now is I am going to add in, or rather I'm going to use my eraser tool, and I'm going to create a little bit of dimension with our character here by adding some highlights, by actually just removing some of the shadow tone that I put in for his entire face. So I'm grabbing the soft eraser tool. I'm controlling the opacity a little bit and see what I like here. Like that in the middle. And right here I can just start adjusting my tool to the size and the flow that I like. Yeah, so I'm adding nice little highlights, where I think some lighter values should be in the teeth. Of course, maybe here in the cheek area as well. And the side of the top of the ears, wherever I think a little bit of light might hit his face. And I do this throughout. Again, not being precious, just being very general about it. Just adding another little layer of dimension to the frame and to the tone very, very quickly. And then what I'm going to do is add another layer of multiply and then do another layer of darker shadows to add even another layer of dimension. I like doing that because it helps keep things separate and clean, and then of course I can merge them down if I like everything. Yeah, so putting in some tonality here and there, some in the hair. And then what I like to do is I like to take like a smudge tool or a blending tool and just blend out some of those edges, hard edges on those transitions. Helps it create things look a little bit more natural, a little bit more organic. Adding a little shadow underneath the chin. Same thing, I'm going to soften that up a little bit with my smudge tool in Sketchbook Pro. And yeah, so this is coming along nicely. You can see that adding tone can create a nice little quick three-dimensional effect and bring up your drawings up to a more finished look for your client. I'm adding a little bit brighter highlights here and there on the cheek area. This adds another layer of dimension. And this is where good studying about values and painting and drawing comes into play. And if you study about that, that can help you create these nicer three-dimensional effects a little bit faster. And we can see here that everything is still on a separate layer, which is good because I can control that at any future time and save this as a PSD file, Photoshop file, so that I can manipulate it and control it, and in case there's any revises moving forward. So that's about adding tone. This lesson is about layers. Keeping things on layers can save you a lot of time and can be very, very useful when making revisions. So you can see on the right, I'm clicking off the different layers so we can see how everything is separated. And you'll notice also that I labeled most of the layers so that I can keep things organized. So we're looking at the different layers and how they will going to be applied in the final frame. Here's the background line work. I'm going to show you the tone now added on a separate layer. Here comes the tiger as line work and tone. What's very, very good about doing this is that, for instance, if the director decides that he doesn't like where he or she doesn't like where the tiger is, I can move that tiger around and also make it bigger, make it smaller, and this saves a lot on time and redrawing. Everything's on a separate layer, including these little elements like the arrow and the type that says leaps forward and the action lines and such. This all will help you keep things very, very organized and also will save you time when revisions come around. So layers can be your friend. In this lesson, we're going to be talking about creating depth, specifically with the background, but also possibly with the foreground elements as well. So I have Gronk and Frank on a separate layer, and I have the background on a separate layer. I'm going to create a copy of the background layer, and I'm just going to use my blur blending tool, and I'm going to just soften the entire background. And already you can see that we're focusing more on Gronk and Frank here, which is a great way to create a sense of depth and also focus on the foreground elements of the main action or the main characters. And that's a really quick thing to do. We can also talk about softening the foreground elements, which will create even another sort of camera effect. And so that if I go in here and start to soften a bit some of the foreground elements, we can create even more of a focus on Gronk and Frank. But that, of course, will be probably the choice of the director. But it's a great way to still focus in on the main characters. Another way to create a little bit of depth and also be able to focus on the main characters is to lighten the background a bit. So this, I'm doing a sort of a simple way to do this. I'm adding a layer on top of the background, and then just with a soft eraser. Oh, actually, yes, that's what I'm doing. I'm using the soft eraser. I'm lightly erasing some of the intensity and the darkness of the background. And you can see immediately that also helps push things back. And you could do that with a layer as well. If you didn't want to play around with the background layer, you could add and use your airbrush and airbrush in some white to lighten the background and control the opacity. Any way you do it, it still has the same effect. And it really is helpful as well to make sure that the focus is on the main characters. In this lesson, we're going to talk about repurposing. Repurposing means taking something that you already created and using it again in other frames. In this case, we're going to talk about the background, and we're going to see how we can use the same background multiple times throughout your storyboard concept or your shooting board concept to save time. So we've got the background, and we can see we've got this lightning here. But if I retouch that out, or if that's on a separate layer, I can delete that. And then I could zoom in on that same background frame and use that for the following frame when we're closer to our main characters. So the lightning's gone, and I'm also going to soften the entire background area so that it creates a better depth of field and more depth. But you can also see how in the next frame, I can use it again, the same background. This is all, of course, if you're keeping things on separate layers. So it's very important to keep things on separate layers. And it's still that same base background that I created, but I'm just softening it. And again, I'm using it here. I'm keeping the lightning, but I'm actually just adding some more foreground. So this saves me a ton of time in drawing. So all that huge expanse in the background of this particular frame was all from that original main background artwork that I created. And I just extended more of the foreground. So here from this one piece of artwork that I created, I get several backgrounds out of that just one drawing because I'm keeping it on a separate layer. And that can save you an enormous amount of time. And it's also very good for consistency. So very good to do, and apply that in your work. In this lesson, we're going to be talking about keeping your files organized. It's very important. You'll see here I have each of my files clearly labeled: Uncle Dave's Steakhouse JPEGs, Uncle Dave's Steakhouse PSDs, and Uncle Dave's Steakhouse reference. Keep things very, very neat, easy to read. You'll see within these files of my reference that the Bison, Caveman 1, Caveman 2, Volcano are all neatly and clearly organized. Also, my PSDs, meaning my Photoshop files, they are neatly and clearly labeled. UDS, short for Uncle Dave's Steakhouse, and my JPEGs as well, clearly and neatly arranged. This will save you a lot of time and energy when you're working, especially under a deadline, because if you mislabel something, or then you save over something, or you can't find something while you're trying to work on a deadline, it can be very, very frustrating. Stay organized.